I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. It's May 20th, 2025. Montgomery County Council is expected to pass next year's budget this week. Council President Kate Stewart explains the trade-offs. New data analysis shows disproportionate increase in full-time positions in the county and in the school district. The Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments survey of regional homelessness shows little change except in Montgomery County. The National Park Service proposes ending the morning and afternoon reversible lanes on Rock Creek Parkway, which have been in operation since 1937. In small-town Maryland, Newmarket and Woodsboro, stories of political contestation and more. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Arlington-based experimental music composer and producer Pierre Bernasconi. There is a lot of AI music in this genre today, but not here, where Bernasconi used a Minilogue, Cobalt 8X, and LTD guitar with Focusrite, as well as the software Reaper DAW and many FX pedals. You can find his music on SoundCloud and YouTube. Last week, Moody's downgraded Maryland's public debt, and Governor Wes Moore vetoed climate and reparations study bills, citing financial concerns. State leadership, the governor, Lieutenant Governor Aruna Miller, the state Senate President Bill Ferguson, House of Delegates Speaker Adrian Jones, Comptroller Brooke Lehrman, and Treasurer Derek Davis came together to call the credit rating change a Trump downgrade. The downgrade has angered moderates and Republicans and opened political space for the potential return to state politics by former Governor Larry Hogan. Whether this actually happens or not is hard to predict. Governor Moore's veto of the reparations bill has particularly angered black legislators and the Black Caucus in the General Assembly. Senator Charles Sidnor from Baltimore County and Delegate Jeff Long from Calvert, among others, have publicly expressed dissatisfaction and called for a veto override. And climate activists who backed Moore in the past are upset about the climate bill veto. Meanwhile, Congress is debating cuts to Medicaid, which could blow another hole in the state budget and force a special session in October. Moody's has said that Maryland is the state most vulnerable to federal worker layoffs and policy changes. We will have more on the vetoes and the financial stress in the state in upcoming episodes. Stay tuned. In Montgomery County, where 70,000 federal workers live and tens of thousands more work on federal contracts, the financial stresses are similar, but the conditions are different. Property tax revenues are up as assessments have ballooned. The state also altered income tax brackets and high bracket tax rates, which will increase revenue collection. The county council took all of this in to reject the county executive's property tax hike, which he then withdrew, and then the income tax hike he proposed. County Council President Kate Stewart joined us to explain the trade-offs.
The Board of Education's ask for MCPS funding this year was $268 million above maintenance of effort. So that's money above what they received last year. And when we were looking at that and thinking about how we could fund as much as possible of the school budget, we found that we could fund $210 million in ongoing money. But in order not to do a tax increase, there was a gap of about $50 million. What we proposed to do was take that $50 million by reducing the amount of pre-funding that would go into retiree benefits, and then do the same thing actually looking forward in FY26, another $25 million, reducing money from retiree benefits. The pre-funding is something that we have done since FY16. We usually do it at the end of a fiscal year or close to it around this time because MCPS may have an issue with a cash flow or covering their retiree benefits. We did it last year as well when we were discussing the budget. The idea this year, though, was to not only do it in the fiscal year we're in now, but to do it looking forward into FY26.
The school system also has to pay a higher proportion of the teacher pension costs according to the state. So that is about $21 million a year. Where is that coming from?
Teacher pension that got passed down to us actually ended up being closer to $18 million, and we're covering part of that in this.
You've already gotten some pushback on your plan to move $50 million from the Retiree Healthcare Trust Fund to the school budget. Fraternal Order of the Police has written to the council saying that...
They actually rescinded the letter.
They rescinded the letter?
They did today. We got another letter from the Fraternal Order of Police because we are not, just to be clear, we're not taking the money out of the trust. This is pre-funding. We are still putting money into the trust, over $5 million. The MCPS portion of the trust was at $860 million as of July of last year and has a 43% funded ratio, which is a pretty strong funded ratio for a trust this large.
Why were you pre-funding if the trust was healthy?
While 43 is a good funded ratio, we'd like to actually see that higher.
How much higher would you like to see it?
Each year, how much money we actually should put into the fund is provided to us through the actuaries.
Do you recall what the number from the actuaries was this year? Higher or lower than 43%?
I'd have to go back and look. We're still within what we're allowed.
How are you looking at the increased revenue from property taxes as a consequence of property assessments going up?
Well, that was a big conversation we had after the county executive sent over his budget in mid-March. And one of the things that many people on the council talked about is assessments had gone up so much that to add on to that, a property tax increase may be very difficult.
Maryland lost its AAA bond rating. DC lost its AAA bond rating a few weeks ago. Are you concerned about Montgomery County's bond rating? Or actually, even before that, is Maryland's downgrade going to affect you?
The state has received negative outlooks before, and it hasn't impacted us. Why it was important during this budget that we ended up with a healthy set of reserves. We'll come in a little bit around like 11.2. We're trying to figure out the final number before we vote on the final budget next Thursday. The other thing they look at is our funds. Like we have a stormwater fund, we have other things, and making sure that they are healthy and able to pay for the projects that they were set up to pay for.
Kate Stewart, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
The bulk of spending by any local jurisdiction or school district goes to employee salaries. Montgomery County and Montgomery County Public Schools are no different. New data analysis by former County Council budget and financial analyst Jacob Sesker tells a startling tale.
Beginning in FY20, the number of county government employees has grown significantly faster than the number of county residents. County FTEs, full-time equivalents, going from roughly 9.5 per thousand residents to something like 10.5 per thousand residents under the county executive's recommended budget for fiscal year 26. So that's a pretty significant increase in the size of the public sector workforce relative to the population that it's serving. On the school system side, we did see something similar this year. Pretty significant increase in the number of FTEs in the school system when equalized by school enrollment. Over the last several years, MCPS FTEs have gone from something like 138 FTEs per 1,000 MCPS students to something more like 158 over a relatively short period of time, increases in both Montgomery County government and MCPS of something along the lines of 10 to 15% when equalized on the basis of the population that you're serving.
I want to clarify that FTE stands for full-time equivalents, which is a job.
Right, a job, a full-time job.
A full-time job. Okay. But your data goes back to 2005. And we see the increase pretty much linear over that period of time. Rough back of the envelope, I saw a 33% increase in staffing, slightly higher in MCPS, somewhat lesser in county government. The population over this period of time in the county went from 920,000 to almost 1.1 million, and it's about 17%. So is that your understanding of what's going on?
When you're looking at population plus inflation, in particular over the last, say, 6 to 7 years, what we're seeing is growth in the budgets and growth in the workforce sizes that are outstripping the rate at which the population, service populations, and inflation are increasing when added together. We should not be seeing growth rates in, the number of Montgomery County government employees or MCPS employees that are really out of whack with the growth rate in the county's population or in MCPS enrollment.
There is talk of staff shortage in the school system. Is the staff shortage real? These are all authorized positions, not necessarily filled positions, right?
These numbers are using the number of authorized positions. If they're asking for positions that they are unable to fill, then they should not be requesting funding for those positions during the following year. If you're asking for an appropriation for one purpose and then you're unable for whatever reason to use the funds for that purpose, then what it's really giving you is carte blanche to use those appropriations for other purposes, including purposes that haven't really been discussed and that there hasn't been some level of demonstrated public support for.
The blueprint came into operation around the same time as you start seeing this massive growth. What about the blueprint impact?
The blueprint did have a pretty significant increase this year, pushing up the numbers for Montgomery County. And I think, obviously the state is revisiting the blueprint.
The state has pushed back the timeline on the staffing itself.
A lot of the request from MCPS was for positions in, special education and in student mental health. And I think that there is widely agreed upon shortage for staff people in those areas, in school systems across the country. Whether or not the, regional labor market actually has enough people to enable a school system like MCPS to find 700 additional special education teachers is an open question.
What about moving appropriation money from hiring 700? If they can get 700, can they get 500 but at a higher salary? Is that a possibility?
I do remember that there was some discussion in FY25 or calendar year 2024 about over what period of time the school system would try to better meet the needs of its students with respect to special education staffing.
What about the other agencies, Montgomery County government as a whole? Is their increase similar to the MCPS increase, or is that lower somewhat and more in line with the linear increases from before the pandemic?
Just going back to FY18, Montgomery County government has added about 10.4% to the number of FTEs, and MCPS has added 13.9%.
Jacob Sesker, thank you.
It's always a pleasure.
The new regional homelessness survey conducted by the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, called the Point in Time Count, just released its 2025 data showing a 1% decline in Washington DMV area's homeless count between 2024 and 2025. The stability hides three underlying facts. First, DC, the city, saw a 9% decline in its homeless population. Montgomery County was the only major jurisdiction in the region to see a dramatic increase, 30%, which is actually less than the increase last year in 2024. The Northern Virginia jurisdictions, which had seen an increase in homelessness in 2024, saw smaller increases or even declines. Montgomery County officials have said that the reason for the increase is the so-called beautification of Washington, D.C., being conducted by the city government at the behest of President Trump. But there's a lot of studies of homeless populations which suggest that the unhoused are not in fact constantly moving between jurisdictions, though that seems to make intuitive sense. Jesse Rabinowitz of the National Homelessness Law Center, who has previously worked with unhoused people in Washington, D.C., clarifies.
Three things in D.C. particularly. One is that the housing investments that so many people fought so hard for in 2022 and 23 and were eventually funded despite the strong objections from the Bowser administration have finally gotten out the door and people are moving into housing. But that shows that it is taking way too long for people to utilize the vouchers after they're matched to them, and that's just unacceptable. So it is showing that when housing is funded, people get off the streets and into housing that meets their needs, which is good and something to celebrate, but it shouldn't take 2 or 3 years. Number two is DC has opened up to good non-congregate shelters, and people are moving from the streets to shelters that meets their needs. And that is helping people move more quickly from homelessness into housing when there is housing available. And number three, and I think this is an important point, is that DC's numbers don't show the impact of Mayor Bowser's continued eviction of encampments, now coupled with our cooperation with the Trump administration in criminalizing homelessness in DC. People are still sleeping outside because shelters are full and there is no housing, but they're sleeping in places that are harder and harder to find, especially late at night when the point in time is counted. People are still out there, but we're just not capturing them in these numbers. I unfortunately don't think these numbers are accurate.
Why?
It's not sufficient. More people are still entering into homelessness all of the time. We have still, in DC and across the country, failed to prevent people from falling into homelessness. The economy is getting worse. The Trump administration is poised to make it even worse and push more people into homelessness. So people are still sleeping outside.
The point in time count is a year-on-year survey. A survey, by definition, is not going to get everybody, but longitudinally, that at least will give you some sense of where the trend line is. And the trend line in the survey shows a 10% drop, which is not insignificant.
It's not insignificant, and I wish I had faith in the number, but I think, and I know that people are a lot easier to count when they're visible and when they're in encampments, and that Mayor Bowser has destroyed most of the large encampments, and people are now sleeping in the woods or sleeping outside without a tent, so they're harder to see, they're harder to count, and they're not showing up in the data.
So regionally, if you look at homelessness, there is kind of a stable number. So you think the people being pushed out of DC are going to the suburbs? Is that a possibility?
I'm not sure. The national research shows, and my experience working with folks living outside in DC backs this up, that people don't tend to move cross borders very frequently, that people experience homelessness in the jurisdictions where they feel most at home, where they have family, where they have roots, where they have connections. So I'm not sure if it's accurate to say that people are moving in significant numbers to neighboring jurisdictions. I do think the increase in homelessness in the surrounding counties show a worsening affordable housing crisis in the region, which makes sense as rents have continued to skyrocket, forcing more and more people into homelessness.
Yeah, but the numbers are so dramatically different. For example, for Montgomery County, it's a 32% increase. For Fairfax County, which has had similar housing cost increases, the increase is only 3%. So what's the difference?
I don't know enough to know the different regional variations, but I do know that when rents go up by $100, homelessness goes up by 9%.
Where is that number coming from?
I can send you the citation.
Jesse Rabinowitz, thank you.
Of course.
The National Park Service has proposed taking down the morning and afternoon reversible lanes on Rock Creek Parkway between downtown, the Kennedy Center, and the Lincoln Memorial area, and in the north, the National Zoo in Northwest DC. The reversible lane operation has been in existence since 1937, the year after Rock Creek and Potomac Parkway opened for the first time. The 4-lane roadway becomes one way between the National Zoo and the Lincoln Memorial during peak commuting hours in the predominant direction of commuter travel, south in the morning and north in the afternoon. At other times and during holidays, traffic can move both ways. The corridor serves about 7,500 vehicles during each reversible period and nearly 50,000 vehicles each weekday. The reversible lane operations are the responsibility of the U.S. Park Police and cost $800,000. And according to the study, the reversible lane periods account for 31% of crashes on Rock Creek Parkway, while making up about 20% of traffic. The numbers are for the 30-year period 1990 to 2020. Ending reversible lanes without causing a major traffic gridlock is the real challenge, and the National Park Service is proposing a new traffic circle at the north end of the reversible lanes near Connecticut Avenue and the Omni Shoreham Hotel, redesigning or perhaps closing down the P Street entrance exit to Rock Creek Parkway, which is in the Georgetown area. So the ending of the nearly 90-year-old reversible lanes is not going to be costless. In the picturesque Middle Maryland town of Newmarket, which sits astride Interstate 70 between Frederick and Baltimore, elections were held after several weeks of political contestation, which had led the town council to pass a term limit resolution against the sitting mayor, only to be struck down by legal opinion, which said that council members did not provide adequate state-required public notice for a change in the term limit. The ensuing election has led to a whole new council, with old hands either not running or defeated. Most notably, sitting council member Michael Wright, who had filed the term limit motion, was defeated. Wright, a local firefighter, and his wife run a popular pastry shop in town. Winslow Barhans will continue to be mayor, having already served 24 years. 13 miles up Maryland Route 75, in the town of Woodsboro, residents are calling for an ethics investigation and a redo of their town elections. At stake is David Williams, who was nominated to be a town commissioner, but also campaigned to be a write-in candidate to be the town burgess, which in modern language would be the mayor. After the elections, 78 votes for Williams were invalidated, reportedly at the direction of the incumbent town burgess Heath Barnes. Mike Hillman, the editor of the local Woodsboro-Walkersville Journal, picks up the story. I should note that editor Hillman and Burgess Barnes have crossed swords over coverage of town business.
There was an election earlier this month in Woodsboro. They get together the month before, and people stand up in a room and say, I nominate this person for town council. I nominate this person for mayor. there were 3 people nominated to run for 2 seats, but no one was nominated to run against the mayor. So the mayor theoretically was running unopposed. There's been increased focus on some of the things that are happening in the town, especially in its finances. The town recently decided to build a town hall. They don't have one. I mean, it's a small little town. I mean, we're talking, 3 blocks you drive through and you're through the town. And they're going to spend about $1.6 million together on a town hall that's going to be occupied by one person part-time, about 20 hours a week. And then they have one meeting. And the town has got major problems with its water, major problems with its septic. And it doesn't really have a lot of money. So people are questioning, why are we spending the money on this? And one of the individuals who had been coming in over the last 4 or 5 months raising questions on finances decided when he went home, he goes, well, as much as I want to be a town councilman, I probably also should throw my hat in the ring as a write-in candidate to run against the mayor. So he did that. I mean, he looked it up, and you go to the town code, and the town code, that when it deals with election, it basically says you shall have an election and you can do absentee ballots. I mean, it's really innocuous. It doesn't say anything at all other than just have an election. So he decided to do a write-in campaign and started telling people, what I want you to do is write my name in for mayor, because you do have a spot there, write in for a mayor, and also check my name off as a councilman. And he made it clear to everyone that if he won the seat for mayor, he was going to not take the seat for councilman. So it wasn't going to be he was going to be taking 2 slots. He was only going to be taking 1. The election was on the 10th. And just before he went to press with the paper for the May edition, David Williams called me up and said, Heath Barnes accosted him and said, you are violating federal law by running for 2 offices.
So Heath Barnes is the current Burgess mayor.
Right. He's the current mayor of Burgess. When the election came around, people went in and they voted. They went in, the election judges were there. The election judges handed the ballots. The ballot said, Heath Barnes, you can check a mark next to Heath Barnes. You can write in a name for someone else for Burgess. And then you had 3 people for commissioner. Town council. Nothing is said to anyone walking in and voting.
So there were 225 votes in total.
Right.
78 were invalidated because they were for David Williams. That still leaves more votes for Heath Barnes.
Right. Then Heath Barnes comes back after the election's over, after the polls have closed, and releases a document saying, we did this on the advice of our lawyer. And if you read the lawyer's letter, they state Maryland election law says you can't run for more than 2 ballots at one time.
Right. So this is the town attorney, Brandy Peoples.
Right. However, if you read the state election law, it specifically says that requirement only applies to state and county elections. It does not apply to municipalities. Does not. Municipalities operate by their own rules.
Would Heath Barnes not still win if those 78 were counted?
Absolutely. They could have counted.
So what is the deal?
What is the deal? Here's the deal. Why did he go forward and invalidate the votes, direct the validation of votes of his opponent?
Right. So that's a question.
That's the major question. Why did an elected official make a decision to invalidate the votes of his opponent? If this is allowed, you've established the rule that anyone in political power can order the nulling of votes for their opposition.
Okay. So what's going to happen now?
Well, we don't know. They got together at a town meeting, and it got heated really fast. People were like, who gave the direction to the election judges? Barnes said, well, I haven't talked to the election judges since April 1st. And then the town manager came back and said, oh, you know exactly what was said to the election judges because you told us what to tell the election judges.
Who's going to do the investigation?
I think it's really up to the 4 commissioners right now. And yes, they could reach out to the county and have the county bring in a lawyer. And I think it would be a really good healing process for someone to step back and say, really, how did we get here?
Mike Hillman, thank you.
Take care.
That's all for this episode. Be sure to check out our feature interview series that comes out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities of Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Arlington-based experimental music composer and producer Pierre Bernasconi. You can find his music on SoundCloud and YouTube.